Broken Scabbard. The planet looked eerie. Dust particles suspended in the upper atmosphere scattered the starlight into prisms of green, casting the world below in a faint, otherworldly haze. The moon the Walsiax's destroyer escort had passed earlier slipped beneath the horizon, vanishing from sight. None aboard noticed the titanic bay doors yawning open across its cratered flank. From within that hollow sphere, a sleek starship slid into the void, its hull curved and hook-winged, its engines burning with the same cold jade light as the planet below. A second followed, then a third. The moon's great doors sealed once more, and the surface returned to stillness. To any observer, it was just another lifeless satellite, its secret unseen. Far above, in high orbit, the bridge of the Walsiax had returned to routine. The 10th captain and his landing party were already groundside. Little else remained for the crew but duty and maintenance. Auspex adepts cataloged the surface, mapping gravity fields and registering the planet's chemical spectra for the fleet archives. Servitors murmured Binharic litanies, cycling through Vox calibrations. At the observation bay, Shipmaster Sigabild stood before the vast absidal windows, gazing down at the green-tinted world. In one hand he held a picked capture, an old transmission from a probe that had once fallen through an Eisenstein-Rosson bridge on Nitwertha. The stars recorded in that final image matched perfectly with the constellation above the planet now. He slipped the pict into his coat and nodded. This had to be the place. He lingered at the glass, deep in thought. Even as a seasoned voidsman, he would never admit that most of a starship captain's life was routine, endless waiting in the dark. He didn't hear the seer approach. No one ever did. One simply became aware of her presence. She stood at the edge of the viewport, her long white robes moving as if caught in a breeze, though there was none. He knew it was a trick, another illusion from a mind that lived half in the immaterium. She stared out into the void, her expression distant. "Report," Sigabild barked. The red-haired seer didn't turn. In battle sign, she gestured. "Stand by." Sigabild smiled faintly. He guessed she simply wanted to see. For a soul confined to silence chambers and psychic dampers, even the sight of a quiet world could be a rare relief. In the Vox pit, Garspec sat at his station, listening to the endless pulse of the emergency beacon from the surface below. Its tone never changed, steady, mechanical, monotonous. His gloved fingers drummed on the brass console edge, tracing the rhythm unconsciously. Then came a burst of static, sharp enough to make him wince. He adjusted the gain and leaned closer. The pulse resumed, unchanged. Then the Astartes channel blinked to life. Garspec rerouted the feed through the sanctified servitor link. The pallid woman's white eyes opened, her remaining hand twitching across the rune keys. The voice that followed was unmistakable. "We are investigating Xeno ruins. We've detected life signs." A burst of interference cut across the signal. Believed to be survivors of the Third Company. Garspec looked at the servitor, who typed rapidly into her slate. "Confirmation. Ident sanctified." He switched to transmit. "Information received and logged, Captain. We are maintaining orbit and await further orders." The servitor closed her eyes again, returning to stillness. Garspec tore the printed copy from the oroscribe, sealed it, and handed it to the adjutant, who carried it to the captain. Sigabild broke the seal, read the message in reply, then nodded once. The order and record complete. The scroll was taken to the comms archives, numbered, blessed, and stored. Garspec leaned back, uneasy. Something in the earlier static burst nagged at him, a pattern too sharp, too deliberate. He reactivated the servitor. Her milky eyes opened again. Pulling the reel of recorded data, he ran it through the cogitator at half speed. There, 4.3 seconds of distortion. He filtered the frequency, blocked high tones, slowed it to a quarter-speed replay. Between Herewolf's words, life signs, and believed to be survivors, there was a faint squeal. Meaningless to most ears, but it had modulation. Garspec isolated it, enhanced the base code, and replayed the sample again. This time, he heard the unmistakable rhythm of Binharic speech. The cogitator whirred, gears trembling. The servitor twitched, then typed with mechanical precision. "Confirmation, data trace, non-imperial origin." Garspec exhaled slowly. He sent a coded cant through the internal relay, requesting confirmation of the beacon's true source coordinates. Fear, the Welsiax's helmswoman, brushed a lock of black hair from her face and stood from the command throne, making way for her adjutant to take over the ship's helm. She gave a short nod to Scabbard, then stepped up onto the observation platform above the bridge, a tier normally reserved for visiting dignitaries of the Imperium or the Forge Worlds. A silent servitor offered her a steaming cup. She took it, drinking deeply of the bitter brew that supposedly contained caffeine, though she doubted its validity. For a long moment she stood above the bridge, watching the glow of runes on the data pits, then turned and left toward her quarters with one last nod to the Vox officer. Garspec nodded back. Fear had pulled a double shift. No one else aboard had ever navigated this side of the Arcana Inclusium, and she trusted no other pilot to guide her ship. The Auspex readout scrolled across Garspec's display, 2 lines of numbers and their source trace. To him, the data made perfect sense. The transmission Herewolf had reported came from roughly 300 meters south of the landing party's last position. But the real anomaly lay in how the signal reached them. It had bounced, reflected, from something in orbit, something on the moon. Without direct line of sight, the origin must have used a relay node or artificial satellite, and at that precise moment, the Welsiax had crossed the signal's path. The cogitator finished compiling the data, printing it out on thin parchment. Garspec tore the strip free, pressed the ship's seal into its edge, and carried it personally to the shipmaster. His boots clicked against the wooden decking of the bridge. Scabbard turned at the sound, took the sealed scroll from his hands, and broke it open. He read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. He looked up sharply. Auspex, scan the following coordinates. The bridge fell into that taut, waiting silence that precedes either discovery or death. Crewmen turned their heads. The astropath Aylward, who had been leaning against the viewport half asleep, straightened as the psychic atmosphere changed. The red-haired seer folded her hands behind her back, watching without comment. The Auspex officer conferred quickly with his adepts, their voices low and tense. Then came the reply. Feed transmitting to main display, my lord. The hololithic screen above the viewport flickered to life. A shape appeared, black against the void, its edges traced in green light. A pyramidal satellite. The Auspex officer spoke again, his voice uncertain. Apologies, my lord. It appears to placate our scanners. Some kind of null field interference. We nearly missed it. Scabbard's hand moved to the hilt of Tempest's bite at his side. Thank you, Mr. Garspec. Well done. Garspec saluted and stepped back to his post. Scabbard turned toward the helm. Bring us about, he ordered. It appears someone on the surface has friends on the moon. Let us see what they are up to. Fear moved through the companionway, cup of recaf in hand, weaving past a pair of arguing priests of the machine cult. A young voidsman stepped aside to salute, offering her a report sealed in a reliquary cage. She returned the gesture with a half-smile and continued down the narrow passage. She passed a sign etched in brass and sacred oil, indicating the direction of the upper void shield array, for the benefit of any soul reckless enough to go looking for it. Turning the corner, she entered the section reserved for the bridge crew, a row of compact doors spaced evenly along the bulkhead. The proximity made for easy access for weary officers, but just far enough from the command deck that no one would bother the captain over trivialities like errant asteroids. She released the seal on her compartment hatch. The door slid open with a hiss, and a faint scent of oranges drifted out to meet her. Fur maintained a small hydroponic arboretum within her quarters, growing her own fruit to offset the metallic tang of recycled air. She stepped one foot inside, then stopped. From the corridor behind came a sound that didn't belong aboard a starship. A tearing noise like parchment being ripped. She turned slightly, frowning. A flicker of green light glowed against the far bulkhead, just for an instant, then was gone. Green? There was nothing aboard a Navis Astra Wigathane destroyer that should flash green. Then came a clunk, the metallic thud of something heavy falling to the deck, something like a reliquary cage. Fur set her cup down, holstered her pistol, and drew her Seek's blade. Then, thinking better of it, tossed both onto her bunk. Plucking an orange from the nearest branch instead, she began to peel it as she stepped back into the passageway. The sharp, clean scent of citrus cut through the recycled air. Probably just one of the voidsmen dropping his cargo, she thought. From the soft hum of voices ahead, she could hear the same priests still bickering. Likely they had collided with the courier, another petty debate over right-of-way in the Emperor's navy. Still smiling faintly, she rounded the corner and leaned through the archway. On the deck lay two pools of molten bone and metal, the remains of the red-robed priests. Their sacred reliquary cage lay discarded nearby. The voidsman who had carried it now hung suspended, held one-handed by his throat by a tall figure, a silver skeleton, an impossible walking construct of polished metal and burning emerald light. Four more of the things stood farther down the passageway, silent and precise. Fear darted back behind the bulkhead, heart hammering. Her hand went instinctively for her sidearm. Damnation! It was in her quarters. She reached for her Seek's blade, also in her quarters. She risked another glance. The voidsman was still struggling, kicking weakly in the grip of the tall intruder. The metallic creature turned its head, the sound of its voice like 5 speakers misaligned in chorus. Clearly, a descendant. Fear's eyes flicked to the emergency alarm lever mounted behind the Xenos. Another was located farther down the corridor behind her. Too far. Worse, the metal figures were advancing toward the void shield emitter control. Their intentions obvious: sabotage. She had no time to think. With a wordless snarl, she hurled her orange at the creature holding the voidsman and sprinted for the alarm. The tall skeleton jerked back as the fruit burst against its chest plating. It emitted a distorted screech. "Acidic compound weapon," it barked to its fellows. The voidsman dropped heavily to the deck, drawing his sidearm and firing. Fear's hand found the liver. She pulled. At once, the lumens dimmed from white to flickering red. Warning strobes flashed above each hatch, and the great blast doors of the void shield relay slammed shut. One of the metal intruders was caught mid-stride. The door sheared it in half, scattering its glowing limbs across the deck. The two-tone scream of the ship's alarm filled the passageway. The voidsman fired again, his rounds sparking harmlessly from the alien's metallic frame. The leader raised its weapon, a long staff crackling with viridian energy. The voidsman's body was struck, armor and flesh vaporized into a collapsing heap of molten slag. Fear ran. Another blast scorched the bulkhead beside her, leaving a hole rimmed with molten ceramite. She dove through her cabin door and slammed the hatch, locking it. "Bridge, this is Fear," she voxed between gasps. "Xeno's boarding party, Deck 3, Section 7. Highly hazardous." A thud struck her hatch from the outside, bending the locking bar outward. Then the metal began to glow, melting under a narrow beam of green light. Fur smiled grimly. "Not today." She drew her pistol, aimed at the small portal window, and fired. The viewport shattered into the black void. The emergency force field flickered on, sealing the breach with a thin shimmer of energy. She knew the power cells would hold for maybe 20 seconds. She pulled an access panel from the wall, revealing a cramped maintenance conduit and the dormant servitor that operated the air system and shift alarm. She yanked it aside and crawled through the narrow space, boots clanging against the conduit's inner plates. A few seconds later, she pushed through another hatch into Garspek's quarters. She slammed the panel shut just as a deep metallic groan echoed behind her. The emergency field had failed. The sudden roar of decompression tore through her cabin. 4 heavy thuds reverberated through the hull as the boarding party was sucked into the void. Fear straightened, catching her breath. The corridor ahead was sealed by emergency bulkheads. She nodded once to herself, holstered her weapon, and started toward the bridge at a run. On the bridge, Captain Sigbjorn's voice cut through the wailing klaxons. "Shut off that alarm!" The sound died to a dull hum, leaving only the thrum of the engines and the rasp of breath from tense crew. From the vox pit, Garspek called out, one hand gripping the receiver, the other typing responses into the comm array. "Boarding parties confirmed, Lord. Deck 2, Compartment 7, contact with Void Team 4. Deck 9, Compartments 6 and 2, Void Teams engaged. Deck 11, Compartments 1 and 10, multiple hostiles, contact heavy." Sigbjorn ran the layout of the Walsiaks through his mind, the corridors and decks mapped by instinct. His eyes widened slightly. "The void shield emitters," he murmured. Then louder, "Order all armsmen to defend the emitters. Nothing touches those relays." He turned to the Auspex station. "We are boarded by whom?" Identify the vessels. The Auspex officer shook his head, sweat running down his temple. Detecting. No ships, Lord. No hulls, no signatures. Only interference. For a moment, silence fell. Then Astropath Aylward, who had been motionless until now, raised one hand to his temple. His pale eyes rolled back as he reached into the immaterium. Slowly, he turned to the vast adamantium viewport, hand outstretched toward the void beyond. Through the green haze of the planet's dust belt, three shapes emerged, dark, angular, ghost-lit from within by flickering green light. "There!" whispered Aylward. The seer beside him, her hair the color of rusted copper, crossed swiftly to the Auspex console. "Check for displacement in the dust field," she ordered. "The ships are masking themselves through phase distortion." The Auspex cogitators screamed in protest, runes flashing red and green across the displays. "Targeting arrays are locking on," cried an officer. "We have targets. 3 ships, frigate scale, the bridge filled with motion. Crew scrambled between stations, the mechanical voice of the ship's machine spirit intoning battle litanies as the void shields powered up. Sigbjorn's hand rested on the pommel of Tempest's bite, eyes fixed on the burning specters outside. On the bridge, Sigbjorn watched the viewport as the 3 ghost ships hung against the green-tinged starfield. 2 rode together below, the third held itself higher and aloof. "Do they know we see them?" he asked. "Unknown, my lord," the Auspex officer replied. He peered at the arrays, fingers dancing over glyph keys. "They have made no overt move. They may be unable to detect psychers, or they choose not to." Astropath Aylward placed a trembling hand to his temple, eyes blank for a heartbeat as he leaned into the immaterium. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "No psychers aboard that I can sense, sire. Nothing reaches me." The red-haired seer crossed to the Auspex bank and checked her readings. "I sense nothing either," she said. "If there are mines aboard, they are routed, hidden, or they are not mines in the way we know." "Ah, if only we knew who they were!" Sigbjorn muttered. Garspic's voice snapped over the pit. "Boarding teams withdrawing, my lord. All but 2 void shield emitters are down." Sigbjorn slammed his fist on the gilded wolf head of his throne arm. "Damn them. Can you detect teleportation signatures? Gate fields? Anything that would put them aboard without approach?" Aylward shook his head slowly. "The immaterium is calm. I detect no translocation currents. No teleporters used." Sigbjorn's jaw clenched. "Matter transference without the immaterium. Webway tech? Are these Eldar? Drukhari?" Fear sprang onto the bridge, boots clanging, and dropped into the helm throne. "They are neither Eldar nor Corsair," she said without taking her eyes from the viewport. "They are automata, metal skeletons, constructs." "Robots," Garspec said flatly. "Just what we needed." Sigbjorn strapped in, the leather of his harness creaking. "Brace for maneuvering. Helm, maintain present course but run deceptive signatures. Engineering, bleed a portion of the aft plasma vents to simulate critical system failure. Make it look like our boarding action has crippled us. Do not actually endanger the reactors. Fake it." He turned back to the viewport as the Walsiax juddered on minor vector changes. The lone ship above began to slide closer as the destroyer altered attitude, drawing it into more obvious firing geometry. "Clear macro cannon for firing," he ordered. "Prime lance batteries. Load plasma torpedoes into tubes 2 and 3. If they close for boarding, we will not let them take us for free." "Aye, my lord," came the chorus of replies. Sigbjorn tightened the harness across his chest, eyes flicking between the Auspex runes and the distant, ghost-lit shapes. His jaw clenched. The muscles near his left eye twitched. Every option played out in his mind, none ideal. The Xenos craft were larger than the Walsiax, each one easily capable of outgunning her, but this was not his first battle, and not the first time he had fought against the impossible. The lone enemy ship above them moved first. Green light began to pulse and gather at the edges of its wide, gull-like wings, weapons charging. Sigbjorn nodded once, a sharp movement. "Fear, full speed ahead. Bring us between the planet and that damned ship. Use the gravity well if we must." The destroyer's deck shuddered as Fear's hands flew across the helm. The Walsiax pitched forward, descending toward the atmosphere. "Aylward," Sigbjorn called across the bridge. "Stop those dust particles moving between us and that ship." The astropath hesitated, brow furrowing. "Sire, my powers are limited. I cannot." Sigbjorn cut him off with a curt wave. I'm not asking for a miracle. Just stop them moving. Hold them still." The astropath bowed his head, whispering litanies as his fingertips bled light. The engines roared, the deck vibrating underfoot. The Walsiaks plunged low, too low, skimming the upper atmosphere where green dust gave way to churning, storm-lit clouds. The outer hull began to glow cherry red from friction. Warning runes flared across the bridge displays. The Necron warship turned, tracking their descent. As it pivoted, its wing structures flared, drawing in the luminous particles from the dust belt around it. The stellar debris didn't scatter. It was pulled in, curling in luminous spirals toward the ship's hull, like dust drawn to a magnet. "It's feeding on the dust," Garspec muttered, siphoning energy from it. Fear's fingers gripped the helm tighter. "Then let's see how it likes choking on a storm." The Walsiaks plunged lower, turbulence hammering the hull. Lightning flared along the planet's cloud tops. The destroyer's shields hissed under the strain as the green light of the Xeno ship dimmed, the atmospheric interference growing dense between them. Sigibild stared at the ghost ship on the display, its outline blurring in the interference. "Keep us steady," he said quietly. "Let them come to us." Outside, in the dark above the storm line, the Necron vessel's hull flared again, brighter, like a predator sighting prey. "Detecting power surge from the enemy vessel," shouted the gunnery officer. Outside, the Necron ship's wingtips turned opaque, veins of green light flickering across their surface. A heartbeat later, two beams of viridian energy lanced through the void. Sparks like fireflies scattered in the dust field. One beam dissipated harmlessly. The other struck glancing blows against the Walsiaks's hull, slicing away a communications array and scorching the plating, but doing little else. Sigibild gave a short, satisfied laugh. "That will do," he said. Garspec glanced at Fear. "They missed," he said. Fear allowed herself a small smile. "Their sensors are scattered. We're using the planet's upper atmosphere as a plasma shield." The Xenos ship dropped lower, gliding behind the Walsiaks, its own hull glowing emerald in the storm. "Hull temperature rising," called the engineer. Sigibild snapped, "Tell the chef to pour water on it." Then to Fear, "Pitch pole." Fear slammed the collision alarm. The Walsiaks's thrusters fired fore and aft in rapid sequence. The ship rolled end over end, flipping nose first into a controlled windmill spin. Two more beams of green light speared through the cloud cover, one missing cleanly, the other scraping the destroyer's flank. The remaining void shields shunted the energy into the immaterium, flaring like ghosts around the ship. The Walsiaks leveled out, flying backwards, its prow now facing the pursuing Necron craft. Sigibild pointed his gloved hand forward. "Fire!" the lance battery screamed, a line of white-hot fury slashing across the void. Two torpedoes detonated against the enemy's shields, while two more punched through. Plasma fire boiled across the Necron ship's hull, igniting where it mingled with the charged dust field. Segments of living metal peeled away like molten bark, exposing the skeletal framework beneath. The Xenos vessel tried to climb, its engines flaring, but four more torpedoes struck home. A final lance strike cut clean through the bow. The ship erupted in a spectacular cascade of green and white flame, disintegrating into fragments that burned out in the planet's upper atmosphere. "Bring us up," Sigibild ordered. The Walsiaks's engines roared again, lifting her free of the turbulence. The destroyer rose through the thinning clouds, turning its prow toward the remaining Xenos vessels. Behind them, the shattered hull of the enemy frigate burned like a falling sun, breaking apart across the sky. The bridge erupted in cheers, but Sigibild remained grim, his expression carved from iron. "Now they know not to overestimate us," he said coldly. "They won't get that careless again." Sigibild snapped the harness tighter. "Fear, full speed toward those vessels. Garspec, open a direct Vox link." Garspec's hand hovered a moment, then the Vox light illuminated and he keyed the transmitter. Sigibild's voice rang out over the void, formal and cold. "This is the Navis Astra Wigathane ship Walsiaks of the Navis Imperialis. Identify yourselves and surrender. We will spare 1/4 of your crew." The bridge went quiet. Eyes watched Sigibild as the Vox channel cut. He turned to them, low and quick. "They have no idea who destroyed their companion, nor what we are capable of. I don't want to give them time to think." Both surviving Necron warships answered in kind. Their extreme-range beams fizzed and died in the ionized wake before reaching the hull. Then their engines flared, the vessels accelerating with terrible unemotional precision. Scabbard let a humorless sound escape him. "Ah, they have adrenal, something. They can be roused." He gave a curt command, steel in his voice. "Gunnery, prepare parallel broadsides. Fear, full thrusters, engines to ramming speed. Take us between them." The Walsix answered, pitching the destroyer into a controlled, deadly run that would place her prow between the two green-lit predators and make the bridge a killing ground. The green lances fired again, slicing through the void where the Walsix had been seconds before. The beams struck empty space, boiling dust and debris into a brief aurora of emerald flame. Moments later, torpedoes streaked from the Xenos ships, elongated spears of viridian energy. When the Welsiax's counter-salvo launched, the enemy torpedoes met them mid-flight and both dissolved in a flash of boiling plasma. "They're wasting shots," shouted the gunnery officer. "They don't know what's a threat and what isn't," said Scabbard evenly. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on the flickering silhouettes ahead. "Fear, turn us, 2-second burn, then full thrust. Once we draw level, fire everything." The Welsiax's thrusters howled, the destroyer rolling nose first in a violent tumble. The next barrage from the Necrons seared past harmlessly, though one beam clawed across the ship's hull, melting a long gouge down her dorsal deck plating before fading. Scabbard's voice cut through the smoke and static. "Bring her level." The destroyer steadied, flying backward, prow aimed directly between the twin emerald warships. "Fire!" The broadside erupted. Macro cannon shells tore through the void, exploding against alien hulls in showers of flame and shrapnel. The Xenos' energy fields flared, some rounds deflected or absorbed, but others struck home, chewing holes through the green-lit armor. The Welsiax groaned, her ancient plate screaming under the stress of alien fire. Green plasma scythed across the gun decks in writhing arcs, vaporizing steel and flesh alike. Gunners at their stations simply ceased to exist. Atoms unbound, turned to drifting dust in a storm of radiation. Macro cannon housings boiled from within, molten brass and adamantine sluicing down bulkheads in molten rivers. Servitors fused to their mounts, still clutching firing levers as their mechanical limbs locked in final spasms of devotion. The void siren wailed through the decks, but half the ship no longer heard it. Their ears, their lungs, their souls obliterated in the same instant. Bulkheads collapsed, sending roaring firestorms down companionways. The air stank of ionized blood and burning oil. Flashes of green burned through the smoke where the Necron lances had struck true. On the lower gun deck, one armsman crawled toward the emergency seal rune, half his body glassed by plasma fire. He pressed the rune with what remained of his hand, sealing off the compartment before the atmosphere tore it into the void. Then the Welsiax's lance battery fired again, a beam of sunfire stabbing into one ship's fractured plating. The alien vessel convulsed, its hull glowing white-hot before folding in on itself with a blinding implosion that swallowed sound and light alike. The second Necron craft veered sharply, shards of its dying twin scattering through its wake. Scabbard gave a grim smile as the Welsiax's engines roared anew, the destroyer diving back toward the planet below, using the upper atmosphere as its shield once more. Behind them, the lone surviving Xenos warship followed, bending through the clouds, wrapped in plasma and green fire. "Damage report!" Scabbard's voice thundered across the bridge. The Welsix drifted through the upper atmosphere, her hull wreathed in fire and rolling smoke. Sparks cascaded from shattered cogitator banks, the deck shuddering beneath every breath of the ship's wounded spirit. Garspec, still at his post despite the blood on his uniform, pressed the Vox key. "Bridge to all sections. Status report now." The replies came back in broken fragments, static punctuated by human screams and machine shrieks. Gun deck 1, catastrophic loss. Half the crew vaporized, remaining servitors unresponsive. Secondary batteries offline, plasma conduits ruptured. We're venting drive coolant. Fire control 4 through 9 destroyed. No response from port array 3. Hull breaches on decks 7 to 12. We're sealing what we can. Emperor, save us. Each report struck like a hammer blow. Scabbard's hand tightened on the arm of his throne, the carved golden warg head gleaming in the dim light of emergency lumens. "Half the battery's gone. he said quietly, more to himself than anyone. Decks 7 through 12, vented. Power relays crippled. By rights, she should be dead. The ship groaned, a deep metallic sigh echoing through the superstructure. Warning runes flared and died. Fear, still at the helm, brushed sparks from her hair. Main plasma engine stable, she said, voice taut. Auxiliary thrusters running hot but holding. If we push her, she'll fly apart. Then we won't push her, Scabbard replied. His tone was level, but his eyes were cold iron. We hold, we make them come to us. Garsbeck wiped blood from his lip and turned in his chair. We've lost nearly 300 voidsmen, machine spirits fighting to keep pressure contained. That last hit gutted our midship bulkhead. We're running on faith and stubbornness. The captain's expression softened only for an instant. Then faith and stubbornness will have to suffice. The auspex flickered. Ghost signals shimmered in the green haze of the planet's upper atmosphere. The surviving Necron warship was still there, distant but closing, drawn by the dying destroyer's heat signature. Scabbard straightened, retying the strap of his command harness. All batteries that can fire, ready them. Bring every lumen on the outer hull online. I want that Xenos bastard to see us bleed. He looked up at the viewport, where the wreck of the first alien vessel still burned across the horizon like a false dawn. We're not dead yet, he said quietly. Garsbeck, contact Captain Hyorowolf, Scabbard said, gripping the arm of his throne, voice steady despite the tremor in the deck. Tell him we are making an unconditional retrograde maneuver. Garsbeck turned toward the helm. Fear? She brushed a lock of soot-blackened hair from her face and nodded, one corner of her mouth quirking into a grin. Run away, she said, with alacrity. The Vox officer allowed himself a thin smile as he reached for the transmission key. The bridge erupted. A column of green fire lanced through the hull, atomizing brass railings, cogitator banks, and half of the command dais. The shock wave hurled men and servitors into the air like paper caught in a gale. Emergency seals slammed down too late. Oxygen howled out into the void. Outside, unseen through the swirling plasma and smoke, the last Necron warship had drifted silently into position behind the burning destroyer. Its engines sputtered, containment fields collapsing, its reactor bleeding entropy and radiation. Within the tomb-dark halls of that ship, the Ankh-Fotrata, its lord watched the ruin of his vessel unfold. Once, before the war in heaven, he had been a noble of Trey, a scholar prince of light and geometry. Now, his kingdom was an airless ruin, and his crew were dying again in cold silence. He could feel their screams through the ship's neural lattice, 1,000 machine minds burning out as the reactor flared toward collapse. This was his end, and he accepted it. But he would not die unseen. They will not sing of dust, he murmured in the ancient tongue. They will remember the gleam of my blade. He turned from the viewing dais to the teleportation node, a circle of black stone and emerald light. Around him, metallic forms stood motionless, his last warriors, their eyes guttering as systems failed. He raised his war scythe in salute to the dying bridge crew. The metal beneath his feet trembled. Flames of coruscating energy began to engulf the core chambers behind him. We are eternal, he said softly, and triggered the sequence. The Ankh-Fotrata fired its weapons one last time. A volley of emerald lances flaring through the void, before its hull folded inward, collapsing in a silent implosion that tore itself apart. At that same instant, deep within the Welsiacs, green light rippled across the ruined command deck. The air shimmered and parted, and from the haze stepped the Necron Lord himself, his form scarred, one arm missing, his armor cracked and venting green flame. Behind him, 3 warriors materialized, blades already drawn. Scabbard's remaining bridge crew scrambled for weapons as the spectral figure straightened to his full height, the firelight catching on his fractured metal skull. Garsbeck opened his eyes to chaos. The bridge was a ruin of fire and molten metal. His console had been reduced to slag. Above him, his servitor twitched headless, sparks leaping from its exposed spine. A metallic foot landed beside his head, crushing a fragment of shattered glass. For a heartbeat, fear and shame held him frozen. He was cowering. Then instinct took hold. He reached for his holster, dragged out his bolt pistol, and fired. The Necron warrior towering over him had ignored his prone form, its weapon spewing streams of green fire across the voidsmen at the bridge doors. The first bolt took its chin clean off. The second and third slammed into its chest, shattering metallic ribs. The fourth caught under its arm. The limb tore loose, the Gauss weapon clattering to the deck. For an instant, the skeletal thing looked down at him, jawless yet somehow surprised. Garspak fired again. The last round punched through its eye socket, detonating within. The machine collapsed, dissolving into shards and dust. Across the bridge, Siggebield saw the remaining boarding party phasing through the wall in a shimmer of green light. He tore the clasp from his coat just as the captain of the Ankh-Fotreta emerged, tall, lean, and draped in the tattered robes of a forgotten dynasty. His war scythe hissed, slicing through the command throne in a single perfect stroke. Siggebield rolled to his feet, firing his bolt pistol point blank. The Xenos Lord advanced unharmed, sparks glancing from his armor. Behind the alien, Fur rose from the deck, pistol raised, but another Necron phased through the bulkhead behind her. Siggebield shifted aim, blasting armor from the newcomer's chest. Just enough warning for Fear to dive into the auger pit as a beam of green fire vaporized the railing she had stood beside. The Imperial captain swung again, but the Necron's scythe sheared his pistol in half. Siggebield grinned and drew Tempest's bite, the ancient blade humming with contained fury. To his astonishment, the Necron Lord saluted him, a gesture of recognition, perhaps of kinship through battle, before lunging. The scythe swept wide, fast and elegant, but Siggebield turned the blow, moving in close. He struck beneath the alien's guard, tearing open its chest plate, molten light bleeding from the wound. Elsewhere on the deck, Fear scrambled to her feet. A second warrior loomed over her, weapon raised. A psychic shriek split the air. The red-haired seer slashed at it with a black Seek's blade, drawing a shallow mark that sparked with empiric energy. The distraction was enough. A storm of last fire erupted from Aylward and the surviving gunnery officer, flaying the warrior's chest open. The Necron stumbled but retaliated, cutting the gunnery officer in half with a wave of green energy. His dying shot cracked the Xeno's skull. Its body fell limp, the Gauss weapon flickering and dying. Amidst the chaos, the captain of the Ankh-Fotreta rose again, his armor cracked, his eye sockets burning with dim flame. He parried Siggebield's strike, then swept his scythe through a Mechanicus adept who charged him with a spanner and a prayer to the Omnissiah. Turning once more to Siggebield, the alien saw his warriors fallen. He paused, straightened, and saluted again, then leveled his pistol. Siggebield lunged. The pistol fired wide as Tempest's bite came down in a perfect arc. The Necron's head rolled across the deck, trailing green mist. The silence that followed was broken only by the ship's death rattle. Garspak was already trying to coax life from a shattered Vox unit. Fear was back at the helm, hands shaking as she fought uselessly with the controls. Aylward tended to the seer, blood mixing with oil on the deck. "Report," Siggebield ordered. There was no throne left to sit upon, so he stood amid the wreckage. Through the cracked absidal windows, he could see plasma fires raging along the ship's hull. The Walsiak shuddered, her bones breaking. Aylward looked up. "The enemy warship is gone, sire." Garspak shouted over the noise. "I can only raise 3 decks. Hull breaches across all sections, structural integrity failing." Fur's voice cut through, harsh and strained. "No helm control. Thruster banks gone. We're losing her, sir." Siggebield nodded once. He sheathed his blade, then reached for the shipwide Vox, hoping it still functioned. "All crew," he said, voice calm even as the bridge shook around him. "This is the shipmaster. You have done your duty. Abandon ship. Fag word." The words echoed through the corridors. The Welsiax shuddered violently, rolling on her dying axis. Around him, the surviving crew froze for a heartbeat. Then Garspak broke the silence, bellowing into the Vox relay. "All hands! Abandon ship! Abandon ship!" The captain turned once more to his bridge. The shattered consoles, the viewports cracked and bleeding light, the burning sigils of 1,000 faithful hours now erased. He walked to Garspak's side. "Come on, lad," he said quietly. "There's no one left to hear you now." Garspak placed down the headset and nodded. Together, they turned toward the emergency hatches, the deck shaking beneath them, the walls glowing white-hot. As they left, smoke filled the bridge. The ship's machine spirit wailed a final binary hymn of defiance, and above the dying world, the Walsiax broke apart, a streak of fire and faith falling through the green sky.